Hey everyone, today we're taking a look at the Benjolin module from Epoch Modular. The Benjolin is originally designed by Rob Hordijk and encompasses three primary function blocks, a pair of oscillators, a chaotic signal generator, and a state variable filter. And while the heart of the module is the chaotic signal generator named the Rungler, these three blocks combine to make a surprisingly versatile mini synthesizer in its own right. I had to admit that initially I was under the impression that the Benjolin wasn't much more than like a chaotic noise machine CV generator. But once it arrived, I discovered sounds that even trying to consciously patch together, I was never able to achieve before, and not actually have to patch anything. Anyway, let's take a quick look over the panel and get some examples of why I absolutely love this module. Starting at the top, you'll find two oscillators, oscillator A and oscillator B. Each has a CV input with an attenuator for pitch. These inputs also have a normal connection to the opposing oscillator. So oscillator A, the output of that is normal into the input of the oscillator B external input, and likewise B is normal to A. So whenever you turn these controls up without an external CV patched, you can get cross modulation between the oscillators. Next to that, you have the actual pitch control for each oscillator. You may want to call these a rate control. They do go down into LFO mode. And then lastly, the Rungler input to each of these modules. So it has a dedicated Rungler modulation amount for each oscillator. And next we have the filter, which again has a CV input and attenuator for frequency modulation. It's actually normal to the output of oscillator B. So you have, if you were to turn this up without external CV patched, oscillator B will modulate the filter frequency, the actual frequency control, and it also has a dedicated Rungler modulation attenuation amount, just like the oscillators. It does also have a manual control for resonance as well, which is just below. And the last set of controls here affects the operation of the Rungler. There's an external CV in, an offset control, and an on-off switch for the offset control. The Rungler is essentially an 8-bit shift register that takes its data from oscillator A and is clocked by oscillator B. The last 3 bits of the shift register are then converted into an analog signal, and that is the Rungler's output. The external CV, in this case, controls whether or not new data from oscillator A is used in the shift register. In other words, if you have an external CV above about 7/10 of a volt patched in here, or if you turn the offset control up to create a positive voltage, then the register will use the same data over and over again and effectively loop whatever pattern of data that is in the shift register. No new data will come in from oscillator A. If the voltage drops below 7/10 of a volt, or there's no CV patched in and you have no offset, then it will continually pick up new data, again at the clock rate of oscillator B, from oscillator A. The offset switch simply bypasses the offset control. And last but not least, we have all the various outputs of the circuit as a whole. First are the triangle and pulse outputs from oscillators A and B. We have a XOR output, which is created from the outputs of both A and B, and the Rungler's CV output. We also have a pulse width modulation output, which is created by running the 2 triangle waves of each oscillator through a comparator, and then of course the low pass, band pass, and high pass filter outputs. It's worth noting here that the filter's audio input is fed by a mix of the Rungler and pulse width modulation outputs. Okay, so at its most basic, what we have here is a 2-oscillator synth, which feeds a multimode filter and a chaotic voltage generator, which can modulate the filter and oscillators independently or all together, with the chaotic voltage generator being driven directly by the oscillators. So it's a very organic mix of functions, and it can easily go from relatively conservative sounds, pretty typical synthesizer sounds, to something extremely experimental with only a few tweaks of the controls. So let's start off with a real simple example. Okay, let's start with a real simple example where we're not even going to use any external modules. We're just going to listen to the low-pass output here of the Benjolin. What I've set up is I've turned down all the external modulation controls, which means there's no cross mod, and obviously we haven't patched anything, so there's no external CV modulating anything. I've also turned down the various Rungler inputs to oscillators A, B, and the filter, so there's no modulation from the Rungler initially either. I've set oscillator A up into sort of low audio rate range, and oscillator B is very low LFO range. We're going to kind of use it like a clock for this example. And I've got the resonance and filter frequency all the way down, so I'm just going to start turning the filter frequency up so you can get a feel for how it sounds. Now you can hear that pulse width from the two oscillators going into a comparator. So the pulse width mod kind of rate is based off B, and the primary frequency is based off of oscillator A. Turn the resonance up. It's actually a fantastic sounding filter on this module. The resonance goes just shy of self-oscillation, which I like a lot in this particular configuration. I'll sweep back down with the resonance all the way up. Okay, now we're going to add the rungler in. I actually have it looping a pattern, so we shouldn't really hear the rungler pattern change, although it sometimes can be kind of long, so it might sound like it's changing, but if you keep listening, you'll hear the same pattern in there. And first what I'm going to do is just turn up the rungler modulation going to the filter frequency. And what you may notice is sometimes the filter frequency is actually dropping, and that's because the rungler signal, unlike a lot of random voltages, is bipolar. It's not unipolar like a lot of random signals, so it actually is generating positive and negative voltages. And again, the rungler is clocked by oscillator B. So if we were to increase oscillator B's rate, we'll hear the rungler change at a faster rate. If you've got headphones on, you can hear a lot of the bass that's in this filter. We'll open the filter a little bit up. And to get a feeling for some of the interesting modulation normalizations that are here, again, if we turn up the filter's mod input without anything patched, we actually get modulation from oscillator B. If we wanted to make the clock kind of more chaotic and erratic, we could turn up the rungler modulation input to oscillator B, which is functioning like our clock. Or likewise, if we wanted to get a little bit more variation in our primary frequency, so again, we can get a pretty wide range of sounds just from adding a little bit of rungler or cross modulation. And we can also quickly take this into very interesting, chaotic sort of noise territory. And so far we've been hearing the rungler loop the same data to get the same voltage pattern. Now I'm going to stop that, and we'll see what kind of new patterns can come out of this. And we're back to where we started. So this is just kind of taste of the range of sounds you can get just with the module all by itself. But where it starts to get really fun is just adding a couple modules, sequencers, LFOs, or combining some of the outputs of the Benjolin back in with itself. So let's expand on this patch. Okay, so I wanted to get somewhat of a John Carpenter-ish mood vibe from this patch. So all I did was add a pair of pressure points, which are being clocked by the oscillator B pulse output, and just one row of that is driving the filter frequency, and then I have the first and fourth stages of the pair of pressure points. It's an 8-stage loop, clocking 1/16th step sequence on the Z8000 matrix sequencer, which is controlling the pitch. So basically you're going to hear 4 filter frequency change steps, then the pitch change, then another 4, then the pitch change. And then as we go on, I'll maybe make some adjustments to the rungler to add some more variation. I'll turn the rungler input to the filter frequency up a little bit. And since the sequence is clocked from oscillator B and so is the rungler, we're still going to get that same sort of feel, but with a little more sort of chaotic variation to the filter frequency. Now just to show a little trick how we can fatten things up a little bit is one of my favorite things to do is take the triangle output, if I can find a long enough patch cable here, triangle output and of oscillator A or whatever the primary oscillator is, and mix that in. I'm just going to mix that in a little bit. You can build this even more by taking the XOR output, which is an output you don't normally hear in the Benjolin because it's not going into the filter, it's not driving anything else, and feed this into another filter. One of my favorites is the Res 4. I'll mix that in. So you can get a really interesting pattern going here just with the Benjolin and a couple little helper modules. I mean, really we're just using one other filter and arguably 2 sequencers to pick up the pace. let's expand on this idea a tiny bit more, adding in a couple other things and show you how we can get kind of like a full track going here with the Benjolin at the heart. Okay, this one comes close to what one might consider a performance patch. I took basically what we had in the last patch and modified a couple things. We're no longer controlling the filter with the pressure points. I've instead patched the XOR output into a MMF6 in bandpass mode, and the pressure points is now modulating that filter cutoff. We still have the pitch of the primary oscillator being controlled from the Z8000. The second 16-step sequence on the Z8000 is now going into the Rungler control input, the one next to the offset knob. I've turned off the offset. So what's happening here is, as that sequence is going, every step that goes high, basically is higher than 0.7 of a volt, is going to hold the Rungler pattern and let it loop. So we're getting periods where it's looping the pattern, not looping the pattern, and then taking in new data. So slowly letting the pattern evolve. The other addition is I've taken the triangle output of the A oscillator, and rather than just mix it in, I've sent it to a ADE10 reactive wave shaper, and that's also getting modulated by the triangle output of B, oscillator B. That's going into a tip-top 2040 low-pass filter, and I've patched the Rungler output to modulate that filter frequency. And then lastly, I just threw in a tip-top 808 kick drum. So I'll slowly build this up for you and then tweak a little bit on the Benjolin and let you see for yourself. Right now we're just listening to the Benjolin low pass out. I'm going to bring in the kick drum. This is increasing the Rungler modulation on the frequency of the filter. I'm bringing the second voice, which is the XOR, out to the bandpass filter. And lastly, here's the triangle output through the wave shaper into a filter, frequency modulated by the Rungler output. Again, the Benjolin is the heart of this patch. Oscillators are all coming from the Benjolin. The Rungler output, all from the Benjolin. And again, it's the clock too. So if you start to get a little bored and want to play around with pitch or rhythm, you can use the Rungler to make it a little more chaotic. Or you can start cranking it up in audio rate. let's get one final patch in where I bring in Benjolin number 2, who's been a little lonely here, and sort of put something together and play us out. Alright, our last patch. I wanted to kind of break it down and pull it way back now that we have 2 Benjolins here, and I'm really not patching up a whole lot of stuff. What we'll be listening to is the Benjolin 1, Benjolin 2. There'll be a little bit of the triangle from Benjolin 1 mixed in there, and a kick drum, which is actually being sequenced through a Z8000 actually, just to make a kick drum pattern. But it's driven, clocked by oscillator B. Probably the only other significant thing going on here is I patched the Rungler output of Benjolin number 1 into the Rungler loop control input of Benjolin 2, and Benjolin Rungler out into the same Rungler control input of Benjolin 1. So the Runglers of each one are determining whether or not the other Rungler is looping. It just makes it a little bit more chaotic in how the patterns evolve. They'll sometimes be looping, they'll sometimes evolve some more, they'll sometimes be looping. I just find it's a fun, organic way to play around with it and truly get a lot of random stuff. Almost all the modulation is going to be coming from the Rungler or the cross mod itself, so this should hopefully really show how the Benjolin can shine. Hope you really enjoyed it. Hope you guys all give the Benjolin a try. It's an amazing module. I've had so much fun with it. It's been the first module in a long time that's gotten me really excited to just spend hours trying to see what sounds I can make. So hopefully you do the same. Thanks for tuning in. See you guys next time. Thanks for listening, everybody.